started it. That's terrific.
Okay.
Wonderful to see so many people and some names that I'm not familiar with and faces. So welcome to everybody. If I'm going to go ahead and hit share screen, and okay. First of all, my apologies. My PowerPoint is not quite what it should be. PowerPoint seemed easy when I got started with it 14 years ago before I retired as assistant principal. But I have a few things to learn, I can tell. So anyway, hopefully that it works for us. So first of all, welcome to everybody. So glad to have you here. Voting is one of our most important privileges that we have, and it's important that we be informed. So I was gonna mute everybody, but it looks like everybody did that for me, which is one less task for me to remember. So I wanna quick do a Zoom 101. Realized on Monday we had a wonderful Zoom meeting, but we realized that not everybody knows how to use Zoom. So at the bottom of your screen or on the top for iPads, right next to mute is start video. It's nice if people can start the video so that we can see your faces instead of just your name, but that's a personal choice, of course. In the center, you can click on participants, which is at the bottom of the center. And if you can see different 3 rows of 3 dots, and when you click on that, you get different options. So hopefully that works. Everybody understands kind of Zoom 101. Let me go on to the next.
Woody Hain.
Join the meeting. Good.
So our opening slide, pros and cons presented today. We're starting about a little bit after 11, but our goal is to have you out of here 65 minutes after we started, and brought to you by Rosalie, Marilynne, Roger, and Ann. And Barb is going to help us keep time and any questions. So looking at things, how do we evaluate ballot propositions? Examine what the proposition proposes. Is the proposition consistent with your idea of government? Who are the sponsors and opponents? Who is funding it? That's a big question. Is the measure well written? Does it create its own revenue source, or does it just ask for extra money and ask everybody to find what it is? Does the measure mandate a program without funding it? Is this an issue that can be improved with a yes vote or a no vote? Does the measure amend the Constitution? If yes, is it part of the Constitution? And beware of half-truths and distortions in advertising about the measure. And I should note that the League simply collects the information that people say, but we do not vet it to determine a fact check to see if it's accurate. So you'll see some things that don't make sense. Use your evaluations to determine if it makes sense to you. Thank you. And on to the next slide. For all questions, we're going to ask you to use the chat center, which is in the center at the bottom. Type in questions when you think of them. What we're going to do is we've got 12 different propositions and measure J with the County of Los Angeles. So we're going to do each one. There's a time frame for each one. And then Barbara will read the questions and the person presenting will answer them as best they can or say, I don't know, and we'll find out. If time is running out, we'll answer your questions at the end, or perhaps type after that person has finished with their presentation. And just a reminder that chat is not designed for advocating a particular vote one way or the other, but for a comment, you know, or a serious question, okay? Next, if you want me to send any of the materials, go to chat, give me your name, your request, and your email address. Voter's Edge is a very, very helpful site that the League compiles on candidates and ballot measures. This is what we will be using today as a foundation on the screen. The website is votersedge.org. So that's important to hope you get that. Then one of our big expressions in the League is follow the money. It tells you a lot about who really cares if something passes or fails. Sometimes it's because people just care about something. I'm sure most of you here donate money, but you probably donate millions or 100,000 or whatever. So looking at the money and how much money they're donating gives you a lot of information. As I said before, the League does not fact check what the proponents or opponents say. See if it makes sense to you. Also, the League has positions on the League position on any ballot issue will only be taken if there has been a grassroots study by area leagues and then consensus statements of all the local leagues have been developed, and if it relates to the ballot issue. So the fact that we don't take the position doesn't mean that we've decided it's not worth it. It's simply that we don't do things by board of directors decision. Gee, this sounds like it's a no-brainer. Yeah, let's go for it. It's only if there's been a grassroots study. Today, we're providing both sides of each question. The league is very careful about if we provide an education session, it's both sides. If you want to know why the league has taken a given position, you can go to lwvc.org, and then at the top on the left, you click on ballot recommendations, and that will explain it. So we can take a no on items, we can take a yes on items, or we can take neutral, or we can say we are not taking a position, meaning we haven't studied it. Okay, let me go ahead and I need to stop sharing. I will get my next picture. Here's a list that I think is real helpful, and this is something I can easily email to you. It gives a number of different sources of information put together by the League of Women Voters. And all of this, as I said, is not any recommendation. It's bipartisan information. So League of Women Voters, Pasadena Area, League of Women Voters, California Votes, Easy Voter Guide, Election Resources, SOS Secretary of State, Voter's Edge, which is what I'm going to be using, and then Where's My Ballot? So let me go on to the next. So what we're going to be using is
Marilyn, you've stopped sharing your screen, so we're not seeing anything.
Okay, thank you. So now I need to go to share screen. Thank you. I'm glad you're here, Paul, because you know a whole lot more about this than I do. I had put everything on the, darn it. I'm gonna go ahead and find the information by going back to the computer, and I'm gonna ask, what I'm gonna do is right now ask rather than having Roger, I'm gonna ask the presenter after Roger to go ahead and start, and I've misplaced that paper. But Barbara, can you tell me who's after Roger? Because I need to go. I had it.
Ann Zeiss, return to affirmative action with Ann Zeiss.
So Ann Zeiss, can you go ahead and start speaking then, please? And I'll go to the computer and the internet and find it.
Absolutely. Let's start with Prop 16. This is a legislative constitutional amendment. You need to know that the league was a signer of this official document. The question is, should California and local government entities be allowed to consider diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions? This is known as affirmative action. Before 1996, affirmative action programs were in place. In 1996, California voters approved Prop 209 banning affirmative action. Prop 209 would not have been approved without the support of Ward Connerly and Governor Pete Wilson. Back in 1996, Wilson and Connerly argued for a colorblind society, fair, race-blind, gender-blind. Fast forward to the present, disparities and inequities persist. In a recent study from the Economic Policy Institute, Black workers are twice as likely to be unemployed as white counterparts. You've heard this a lot lately. Some for college-educated Black workers and white counterparts regarding unemployment. The Institute for Women's Policy Research tells us still women earn about 82 cents for every dollar earned by men. It is a guesstimate that equal or equity pay for women won't be achieved until 2059. A guesstimate of equity for Black women with regard to pay 2130, and a guesstimate for equity for Latinas not until around 2224. We are not a colorblind society as hoped. All right, the proposal. If approved, Prop 16 would repeal the section of the California Constitution introduced by Prop 209, eliminating the ban on affirmative action. As a result, state and local entities could establish a wider range of policies and programs so long as they are consistent with federal and state law related to equal protection. Fiscal effects, there would be no direct fiscal effect. It would not require any change to current policies or programs. Potential fiscal effects are highly uncertain. Opponents say approval of Prop 16 would be a step backward, introducing a new form of discrimination to favor politicians' favorites. Prop 16 will require costly bureaucracies to enforce
Sophie,
provisions,
would you like to hear the League of Women Voters presentation on?
burdening taxpayers. And finally, listen to this. Let's not perpetuate the stereotype that minorities and women can't make it unless they get special preferences. That is one of the opponents' points. Opponents listed are Ward Connerly, Californians for Equal Rights, Tom Campbell, the Haas School of Business, University of California, State Senators Ling Ling Chang and Melissa Melendez, American Civil Rights Institute, and the Chinese American Civic Action Alliance. There seems to be no money involved in this particular proposition.
Thank you, Ann. Are we returning back to 14?
No, I'll go back.
Excuse me, Barbara, I also have Prop 17.
Just 1 minute. Let me find out if we're going back to Prop
Yeah,
14.
why don't we go back and start with 14. With 14, okay? So I'll go ahead and,
That's Roger. Stem cell. And could I ask Woody Hain to please hit them?
I don't think I have sound. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you
Okay, well,
mute your, thank you.
oh,
you start talking. Yeah, you'll be on the screen when you start talking.
Okay, Proposition 14 authorizes bonds continuing stem cell research. The question is, should California sell $5.5 billion in new bonds to continue funding grants for research and development of stem cell treatments? In 2004, in response to the federal government's stopping funding of stem cell research, we created Proposition 71 and passed it. And we built the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine and allowed $1 in bonds to fund this institute. To date, the institute has awarded approximately $2.7 billion in grants out of that $3 billion. And they have funded stem cell research, they've developed potential treatments for many diseases using stem cells, and have undertaken clinical trials for new potential treatments. The money has been distributed through Stanford and the University of California system exclusively. Grants have also supported construction of new research facilities on these campuses and research internships. However, it's now June 2020, and they've used up all but the last $30 million of that money, which is 1% of the money. 99% of it is already gone. So this proposal would allow the state to sell $5.5 billion in new bonds to continue their funding of stem cell and other medical research and training, stem cell therapy, and delivery of treatment to patients, new research facility construction, and of course, administrative expenses. It also sets limits on the bond funds that can be used for administrative proposals at 7.5% maximum, and targets funding for research and treatment of certain diseases, with 1.5 billion of that money set aside for central nervous diseases, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, which is new. Prop 14 also is going to phase the sale of these bonds. Rather than sell them all in 1 year, they're going to phase them out over an 11-year period, which will, so the cost will be about $540 or $540 million a year. So the fiscal effect of this, of course, is going to be the cost of the bonds and the interest, which over 30 years will be $7.8 billion. The state, however, is entitled to revenue from any discoveries that are made during this entire process and patented. The future revenue source, of course, is uncertain because as of this point, there have been no patented research or vaccines that have been developed. So supporters say that stem cell funding, supporters say that stem cell funding has led to significant advances in treatments and cures for many diseases, including 2,900 medical discoveries. Proposition 14 is supported by over 97 patient advocate groups. And it will increase patient access and affordable treatment and provide patients, their families, and caregivers with financial assistance. And Proposition 14 will continue the benefit to California's economy. The $3 billion funding to date has generated $10.7 billion in economic stimulus. The opponents, however, say that California cannot afford to spend $7.3 billion this year, particularly in the middle of an economic crisis, and repayment of the bonds will increase taxes. Previous funding has not yielded the promised results. And as an aside to this, when in 2004, there was a great expectation that we would be generating many, many billions of dollars in new procedures, but experimentation takes a long time. And so previous funding has not yielded the promised results for treatment or economic benefits, which is a true statement. Private investors and companies have made great strides in stem cell research. And as a side to this, when the Obama administration came in, they overturned the ban on stem cell research. So the federal government is actively financing to the tune of about $200 million a year in stem cell research. So they are again involved. Let's see, who supports this? Well, we have 97 organizations, including the Michael J. Fox Foundation and various Alzheimer's groups involved. A number of assemblymen and business are involved. Opposed to this is the Republican Party and 5 newspapers. And I'm going to name the newspapers for a specific reason. There's the East Bay Times, Orange County Register, San Gabriel Valley Tribune, San Jose Mercury News, and the Daily Breeze, who are all owned by one company, Digital Media. Okay.
Time, Roger.
Okay, one more thing. Contributions in favor of it, $6 million. Against, no money. That's it. Questions?
Barbara, we don't have time for questions. Is that correct?
No, not on this one.
Okay, so you get to keep talking, Roger, on the next one.
Proposition 15. This one's a little more difficult. Should the California Constitution be amended so that most commercial and industrial property be reassessed on a regular basis? The idea behind this is to increase funding to public schools, community colleges, and local governments by changing a tax assessment of commercial and industrial properties. Proposition 13, back in 1978, capped property tax valuations and rates, and reassessment can only occur at the time of death of a homeowner or when a business is purchased or ownership changes hands. After that, the assessed value can only be increased by 2% per year. Because the value of property typically increases much greater than that, the assessed value of most property in the state of California is far less than its market value. And each county's property tax receipts are the money that's distributed to local governments and schools using a formula that's been in place for years. So the proposal, if passed, Proposition 15 would generally require that commercial property be reassessed to market value on a periodic basis and suggested every 3 years. There would be no change, however, in the rules for reassessment of residential, whether owner occupied or rental, and for farm property. They would not be affected by this. If all of the property that's owned by a larger business has a fair market value of $3 million or less, that property would also continue to be assessed based on its purchase price as adjusted. Reassessment of commercial property that falls eligible would begin in the year 2022. Because they're going after businesses with a value of more than $3 million. They're putting a few sweeteners in there. So small businesses would not pay any tax on their personal property, which is a company with fewer of 50 or less employees. Other businesses would not pay taxes on the first $500,000 of their personal property.
And personal property refers to the things within the building, the cash registers, all the equipment, but not the property itself.
You mean not the real property itself?
Not the real property, no. That's what would fall within the reassessment. So after expenses are taken out of the new monies, the balance of the additional revenues would fund local governments and schools, and that's the only place where the money would go. 60% would go to the local communities, 40% would go to the schools. The fiscal effect of this would be that the Office of the Legislative Analyst of California estimates this could produce between $6.5 and $11 billion per year. Supporters say Prop 15 provides billions of dollars in new revenue for communities and schools. 10% of the wealthiest businesses will provide more than 90% of this new revenue. This gives tax breaks to small businesses to help our economy grow. And it keeps the Prop 13 protection for homeowners, for renters, and for farms.
Also, people are saying that it's a difficult time for businesses, but it does not go into effect until 2022. You said it already, but in terms of sorry, I'll let you finish.
Opponents say Prop 15 would trigger the largest tax increase in California's history. Additional costs will ultimately raise price for consumers. It will make it harder for people to start small businesses and will require huge costs to administer. So supporters of this are Kamala Harris, the state insurance commissioner, the state secretary, Alex Padilla, a number of state representatives, the California State Council, the California Federation of Teachers, Superintendent of Schools, the League of Women Voters, California Teachers Association. The opponents are the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the California Business Roundtable, who represents the largest companies in California, the California Farm Bureau, the California Taxpayers Association, California State Conference of the NAACP, and California Small Business Association.
Time. You do have one remark from Lori Meters that Prop 15 may have adverse impact on many churches. Churches own property worth more than $3 million and will be hit with high tax bills.
Nonprofits are exempt from this.
Unless it's,
Totally exempt?
Totally exempt.
Okay, that answers that. And we are moving to Ann Zeiss on number 17.
Proposition 17 is also a legislative constitutional amendment. A 2/3 vote is required. The question is, should people on parole in California be allowed to vote and vote in elections? People in county jails or under county supervision are allowed to vote. Persons in state or federal prisons or on parole cannot vote. After they serve a specific amount of time, called determinate time, they may be granted supervised parole. Proposition 17 would allow them to vote and run for office if qualified and provided they have registered to vote. There are currently 50,000 people on state parole. The fiscal effects, potentially it could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars statewide administered at county levels. However, actual costs depend on the number of parolees who choose to register to vote. It does create a one-time workload for the state to update voter registration systems. Again, hundreds of thousands of dollars, but less than 1% of the state's budget fund. Opponents say Prop 17 will allow violent criminals to vote before completing their sentences, including parole. Parole in California is for serious and violent criminals who have victimized innocent citizens. Giving people on parole social equity before full rehabilitation will add to victims' pain and suffering. And finally, parole is to prove rehabilitation before full liberty, including voting rights, are restored. People opposed are Harry Salerno of Crime Victims United of California, Jim Nielsen, Chair, California Board of Prison Terms, and Ruth Weiss, Vice President, Election Integrity Project, California. Those in support of Prop 17 say, when people complete their prison sentences, they should be encouraged to re-enter society and have a stake in their community. Restoring voting rights does that. There are 19 other states that allow people to vote once they have successfully completed their prison sentences at the state or federal level. It's time for California to do the same. Nearly 50,000 Californians who have completed their prison terms pay taxes at local, state, and federal levels, yet are prohibited from voting at any level of government. Those who support this are, our California State President of the League of Women Voters, Jay Jordan, Director of Californians for Safety and Justice, and Kevin McCarty, who is the author of Prop 17.
Time.
Are there any questions?
No, not on this one.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, no questions. No questions.
Okay.
Rogers is on Prop 18.
Okay, Proposition 18 is probably the easiest one of all of them. This is to permit 17-year-olds to vote in the primary and special elections if they will turn 18 by the time of the next general election. So the specific question, should 17-year-olds who will be 18 by a general election be allowed to vote in the primary and special elections in that cycle? So if a person is 17 and will be 18 by the next general election, they will be able to vote in the primary election if Proposition 18 is passed, and any special elections. Any registered voter may also run for elective office. So such 17-year-olds could run for elective office if they meet all existing eligibility requirements. Fiscal effect, it would cost several $100,000 to the state of California every 2-year cycle to pay for extra voting materials and the time that election officers need to be working. Supporters say that Prop 18 will allow 18-year-olds to participate in a full election cycle. This will boost the number of youth who actually vote. 17 and 18-year-olds are heavily affected by policies, so they should be able to vote on those policies. When 17-year-olds can't vote in the primary, it can discourage them from voting in the general election because they didn't get to pick the candidates. Opponents say allowing 17-year-olds to vote in primaries on tax issues and debt issuance is not right because they have not paid taxes. 17-year-olds are too young to vote and need more life experience before they're ready when they're 18. 17-year-olds' brains are not fully developed in logic and reasoning portion, and schools would persuade 17-year-olds to vote by putting up posters or having teachers advocate for certain policies. The supporter, is that it?
Yep.
That was quick.
If we're following the schedule, that's it.
But we don't have any data on money that was donated,
Sure we do.
opposed.
I've got all the data, but I don't have time.
Okay, thank you.
The next
That was too short.
measure 20 is the next.
Now,
What
Prop,
happened to 19?
Prop 19.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing. You're right. Prop 19, yes. That's Ann Zeiss.
Okay. Proposition 19 is another constitutional amendment. Keep in mind, this applies only to residential properties. The question is, should our California Constitution be changed to modify the rules for the transfer of a primary residence's tax base to a replacement residence? This applies to homeowners over 55, to someone with a severe disability, or someone whose property has been destroyed or damaged by a natural disaster. It also applies to property inherited by adult children and between grandparents and grandchildren. The proposal states, Proposition 19 would allow eligible homeowners over 55 to transfer a property's taxable value to a more expensive home anywhere in the state up to 3 times in a lifetime. It does not change the once in a lifetime transfer for victims of natural disasters. It does eliminate the transfer of taxable values of inherited properties unless the properties are the heir's principal residence or a farm. It would provide an upward tax assessment adjusted for inflation, to owner-occupied inherited properties with a market value more than $1 million greater than its taxable value. Also, increased state tax revenue from Prop 19 could be used for fire suppression efforts and reimbursement of counties' costs. Fiscal effects. First of all, income or revenue coming into the state. The overall impact of Prop 19 would probably yield local governments and schools tens of millions of dollars per year. I love that. Over time, these revenue gains could grow to a few $100 million per year. Transferring lower property tax bills to a different home could reduce some of local property tax revenues. However, revenue increases overall are expected in the tens of millions of dollars, reaching a few $100 million per year over time. Excuse me. Increased home sales could generate transfer tax and state income tax revenue expected in the tens of millions of dollars. As for costs, state administration costs are expected in the tens of millions of dollars each year. There could be some state cost savings where lower property taxes result in lower state matched school funding. Savings would be applied to fire suppression efforts. Opponents say the California Constitution has been amended 3 times to protect the right of families to pass their home and up to $1 million of property to their heirs without changing the Prop 13 tax assessment.
Excuse me, could somebody mute?
Please.
It is not muted.
Thank you.
We hear you talking.
All right, I'm still on opponents. Reassessment to market value will force families to sell their property because they cannot afford higher property taxes. Those opposed are the president of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association, Patricia Bates, state senator, and Ken Cooley, an assemblyman. I do not see any financial figures with regard to this proposition.
Ann, I've got it. The total money raised in favor is 40,000. Opposed is 40
million, Marilyn.
Million.
Opposed is 45,000.
Thank you. All right, supporters say that Prop 19 expands Prop 13 rules for homeowners who are seniors, natural disaster victims, or people with disabilities, allowing the transfer of their home's property tax value to replace homes of a greater value anywhere in California.
Time.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, I was just done. There's just one
You're talking while I'm
supporter and
mine, okay?
over and out.
So I'm going to be doing proposed changes to restricting parole for certain offenses currently considered to be nonviolent. It authorizes felony sentences for certain offenses currently treated only as misdemeanors and initiative statutes. So a combination, probably all of you remember that back when the courts required that California reduce our prison population because it was severely overcrowded. A combination of laws allowed some defendants to serve sentences in county jails rather than state prison, and changed designation of many crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. It's interesting that the California Public Policy Institute reported that this release had no impact on the violent crime rate, but there's some evidence that the property crime rate increased. Approximately 3,700 people were released under Proposition 57 and the regulations that were pursuant to that. So I'm gonna skip down to, there's an easy voter guide, but you guys want to get a little bit more information. So I'm going down here to measure details. It limits the parole program to for nonviolent offenders who have completed the full term of their primary offense by eliminating eligibility for certain offenses. They really are pretty careful about how they, which things are not eligible for parole, because they really, certain things that are regarded as violent, even though they're not officially violent, seem pretty violent. And so they're, for example, if you've threatened a witness or other kinds of things. Okay, here we go. Proposition 20 has 4 major provisions. It changes state law to increase criminal penalties for some theft-related crimes, changes how people released from state prison are supervised, makes various changes to the process for considering it, and requires the collection of DNA. There's 2 new items that are, they're increasing the penalties. One of the things that they talk about in this whole issue is there's wobblers, which is where something can either be a misdemeanor or a felony, depending upon the person that's making that decision, which could be the judge generally, with recommendations from the parole board. Both of these new crimes would be wobblers, punished by up to 3 years in county jail. That would be serial theft or organized retail theft. Some items that were punished as misdemeanors under previous Proposition 47 would be punished as felonies. It changes county supervision practices for parole. Here's some of the consideration. Inmates such as assault, who have been convicted of assault and domestic violence, they would not be eligible. They would deny release to inmates who pose an unreasonable risk of committing felonies. Consider additional issues such as the inmate's attitude about their crimes, requiring inmates denied release to wait 2 years rather than 1 before being considered for parole again, and allows prosecutors to request that they perform another review of release decisions. It also, regarding the DNA collection, it requires state and local law enforcement to collect DNA samples from adults convicted of certain misdemeanors, including shoplifting, forging checks, and domestic crimes. The fiscal effects are kind of a mixed bag. There's talking about the cost of the courts to go ahead and make these determinations, but the prisons would have reduced costs if they're letting people out, of course. So the actual fiscal effect is unable to be determined. So the arguments for it, supporters say it reclassifies certain crimes like assault with a deadly weapon, date rape, and child abuse as violent. The supporters say that if we go ahead and have these more people stay in prison, somehow it's not going to increase the prison population, but just make sure that people convicted of the crimes serve their full sentences and stay in prison longer. But they say it won't increase the population while they do that. Proposition 20 will help stop car break-ins, shoplifting, and other theft that's been on the rise. The opponents say that it will roll back prison reforms and cost taxpayers millions of dollars annually. They will say it will slash mental health and rehabilitation programs that help to prepare people for release, because the money that has been saved has been used in these early release for these programs that help prepare people for re-entry into the public sector. And opponents also say it will result in extreme sentences for petty theft and will disproportionately impact vulnerable financial minorities. And the organizations who are in favor of having more stringent requirements are numerous groups, and I'm just going to scroll through them real quickly. lots and lots of different cities.
You there?
So and then the organizations that oppose it, A New Way of Life, ACLU, once again, a wide diversity of different groups that oppose it. And the big question is always, where's the money?
Fine.
Okay, so I'll go on to my next one. The money raised was 5.6 million opposing it and a smaller amount in favor. So I'm going to go back up here to Proposition 21, which is also mine.
You there?
Here, let's try it. Here we go. Difficult having the speaker be the same person that's controlling the screen. Here we go. 2021, rent control.
I'm going to run out of time.
So rent control, the situation, California renters typically pay 50% more for housing than renters in other states, sometimes more than twice as much. They say that rent is high here because housing demand greatly exceeds supply. And as you and I know, rents are expensive because houses are expensive. About 1/5 of Californians are subject to so-called rent control laws, which limit how much their housing rent can increase annually. Courts have ruled such laws must allow landlords to receive a fair rate of return. Currently, a state law known as Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act limits local rent control laws. It cannot apply to single-family homes, cannot apply to newly built housing completed since early 1995, that's the current law, and they cannot say how much rent can be charged to a new renter moving in. The proposal would reduce the limits on local rent control laws in Costa-Hawkins so that cities and counties can apply rent control to more properties. Specifically, cities and counties would be able to apply rent control to all housing which is more than 15 years old, with the exception of single-family homes owned by landlords who own 1 or 2 properties. Additionally, cities and counties would be able to limit how much a landlord can increase rents when a new renter moves in, to increase rents by just up to 15% during the first 3 years after a new renter moves in. It would require rent control laws allow landlords a fair rate of return. The fiscal effects, if communities expand rent control laws, probably some landlords will sell their rental housing to new owners who would live there. Value of rental housing would probably decline. Some landlords would receive less income and some renters would move less often. The overall effects would depend upon how many communities pass new laws, how many properties are covered, and how much rents are limited. Overall, Proposition 21 likely to reduce state and local revenues over time, particularly property taxes. The overall effect on state income tax revenue is not clear. Increase local government costs, create a new rent control law, or expand existing ones. Supporters say even small increases in rent forces more families into homelessness, which is a burden on the entire community. Many seniors and veterans presently are left with too few resources for food, medical care, and other needs. Proposition 21 guarantees landlords a reasonable profit. Opponents say more than 60% of Californians rejected this type of scheme in 2018. Rent control results in less available and less affordable housing. And Proposition 21 will stop new housing from being built, cost jobs, and hurt the economic recovery. And let me quickly go down to the money situation, follow the money. So there's 96 organizations that are in favor of it, 142 that are opposed to it. And in terms of the contributions, 24 million has been raised in support of it. 53 million has been raised in opposition to it. So the people that support it, AIDS, healthcare, nurses, Democratic Party, numerous other people, no, California Business Roundtable, real estate groups. So any questions? Okay, then we can go ahead and go on to Proposition 22 then.
Okay, Prop 22 is, it exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. The question is, should app-based ride share and delivery drivers be classified as independent contractors, that is, not employees, and should rideshare and delivery companies be required to adopt labor and wage policies unique to these drivers? The situation is that between 800,000 and 950,000 Californians provide rides or deliveries each year, and the drivers work part-time and make between $11 and $16 an hour. In 2019, lawmakers passed AB 5, limiting the ability of companies to hire workers as independent contractors. The proposal, Prop 22, would reclassify app-based drivers as independent contractors, not employees, unless a company does these things: sets a driver's hours, requires drivers to accept certain rides or deliveries, or restricts working for other companies. Drivers would not receive employee benefits and protections, including minimum wage, overtime, unemployment, insurance, and workers' compensation. Instead, this Prop 22 would require companies to provide the following benefits to drivers. Number one is minimum compensation to pay at least 120% of the minimum wage for each hour spent driving. 2, healthcare subsidy would require rideshare and delivery companies to provide a health insurance stipend to the drivers. Number 3, medical expenses. This would require rideshare and delivery companies to buy insurance to cover medical expenses when a driver is injured while driving. 4 is rest policy. It would restrict drivers from working more than 12 hours a day for a rideshare or delivery company. And 5, other requirements. It would prohibit workplace discrimination, harassment, and it would conduct criminal background checks. Prop 22 would prevent, let me just say, the League of Women Voters always says these are opinions. Prop 22 would also prevent local jurisdictions from setting their own rules. Well, this is not an opinion. This is what it says. It would prevent local jurisdictions from setting their own rules for rideshare and delivery companies. The fiscal effects are lower costs and higher profits for the rideshare and delivery companies. They would not have to pay the costs of providing employee protections and benefits that are currently required under AB 5, and could afford to charge lower fares and fees, increasing the company's profit. The drivers and share stockholders would pay more income taxes because they would earn more income. Because companies would earn higher profits, Californians who earn company stock may earn higher income and pay more in income tax. The amount of increased state personal income tax paid by drivers and stockholders is unknown, but likely minor. The supporters say classifying drivers as employees as required under AB 5 would lead to longer wait times, higher prices, now these are the opinions, of course, and less access to rideshare and delivery services. Supporters say, like AB 5, Prop 22 would improve delivery and rideshare work by requiring companies to provide new benefits and expand public safety protections. Opponents say that it would eliminate basic workplace protections and replace them with lower guaranteed earnings and healthcare subsidies to save costs for the company. Current law does not limit driver flexibility. According to the opponents, a majority of drivers work 30 or more hours a week. So let me just take a quick peek. I think that's it. We'll go on to Prop 23.
You want to talk about the money raised?
Yeah, sure.
So the total money raised, can you see the screen here?
185 million.
185 million is being raised. Look at all the people.
Thank you. You know what? Thanks very much, Marilyn, because I've got 3 things to look at.
I understand.
But I put in the chat that one website that I found very helpful, I recommend, is calmatters.org. And CalMatters points out what Marilyn just did. The supporters are Uber, Lyft, Instacart, DoorDash, California Chamber of Commerce, the California Police Chiefs Association, and the California NAACP. The arguments, the people who are opposing, are Joseph Biden and Kamala Harris, the Service Employees International Union, CTA, and Gig Workers Rising. So it is the difference between $184 million paid by the delivery companies versus 11 million. So that's Prop 22. Let's go to Prop 23, which is the kidney dialysis proposition. It establishes state requirements for kidney dialysis clinics. It requires an on-site medical professional. The question is, should outpatient dialysis clinics be required to have a physician on site at all hours when patients are being treated, offer the same level of care to all patients regardless of insurance, and report infection-related information? The situation is people suffering from end-stage renal disease need dialysis. And typically done in a chronic dialysis clinic 3 times a week, with each treatment lasting up to 4 hours. There are about 600 licensed clinics. Estimated annual revenue of the private companies is $3 billion. Most dialysis is paid for by Medi-Cal and Medicare. Private insurance also covers dialysis with payment rates fixed by negotiation. On average, those rates are multiple times higher than those paid by the government programs. The proposal says that Prop 23 says clinics must have at least one licensed physician on site during all hours when the patients receive treatment. They must offer the same level of care to all patients, regardless of whether treatment is paid for by private or government insurance. They must report more information about infections, and they must notify and obtain consent from the state health department before closing or reducing services. The fiscal effects would increase costs for clinics because a licensed physician would have to be present during all treatment hours. This could average several $100,000 per year per clinic. The new data reporting requirement would not significantly increase costs. It would increase healthcare costs to state and local governments if clinics negotiate higher reimbursement rates, or if some clinics close and patients have to receive treatment at more expensive facilities. These costs are estimated to be in the low tens of millions of dollars annually. Supporters say patients should have access to a physician on site whenever dialysis treatment is being provided, and proper reporting and transparency of infection rates encourages clinics to improve quality, and strong protection should be provided to vulnerable patients when clinics close. The opponents say Prop 23 would force community dialysis clinics to cut services or close, putting lives at risk. Prop 23 would make our physician shortage worse and lead to more overcrowding in emergency rooms. And dialysis clinics are already strictly regulated and provide high quality care. CalMatter says that people supporting Prop 23 are service employees, International Union, United Healthcare Workers, California Labor Federation, and the California Democratic Party. And the supporters donated $6 million. And CalMatters says that the people opposing Prop 23 are DaVita, Fresenius Medical Care, the California Medical Association, and the California State Conference NAACP. And they raised $93 million. And our church friend Elaine, who is a former dialysis patient, was asked her opinion. She does not support Prop 23. And then let's go to Proposition 24. Hope you're taking notes. This is a lot of work, and these are not easy issues to think about, are they? Prop 24 amends consumer privacy laws. The question is, shall an existing law from 2018, the California Consumer Privacy Act, be amended to increase penalties on companies that fail to follow regulations to allow consumers more easily to opt in and out of sharing their data, changes criteria for which businesses need to comply, and to create a new enforcement arm that would cost about $10 million annually? The situation is the Consumer Privacy Act of 2018 brought consumer protections, especially in helping them identify what kind of data was being collected on them. The current act affects businesses which, one, earn more than $25 million in annual revenue, two, buy, sell, or share data from 50,000 individuals, devices, or households, or three, earn 50% or more of their annual revenue from selling personal data. These businesses must notify customers of data collection, comply with personal data privacy rights, and not treat customers differently for not selling their data. They can be fined for each violation of these requirements. Prop 24 would change the following. It would change the categories of businesses affected. Prop 24 would remove the device count and raise the threshold so that only businesses that buy, sell, or share data from 100,000 individuals or households are subject to the rules. It would change the consumer privacy rights. Consumers could direct businesses not to use their personal data for purposes other than the delivery of the actual services those consumers were buying. They could also ask for corrections in that data. The proposal would change higher penalties and less room for cure. Violation of a minor's privacy rights would mean a fine of $7,500, triple the current one. And where the current law gives a grace period of 30 days to fix privacy violations, Prop 24 would mandate immediate penalties. And it would create a new agency. Prop 24 would create a new California Privacy Protection Agency, which would take over some enforcement functions of the Department of Justice. The fiscal effects are that it would provide about $10 million annually from our state's general fund, adjusted over time, to finance the new California Privacy Protection Agency. Overall state costs to the DOJ and trial courts probably wouldn't exceed low millions annually. Fines from new violations might offset these costs. Impacts on business and tax revenues are hazier. Data breaches are costly, and it's hard to know how many breaches would be prevented if new regulations forced businesses to protect their consumers' data better. Supporters say that it would prevent businesses from using or sharing sensitive data about your health, finances, race, ethnicity, and precise location. It would strengthen existing protections by establishing a new protection agency with $10 million a year. And by virtue of being a ballot initiative, it is less vulnerable to watering down through the pressure that lobbyists put on legislators. The opponents say this Prop 24 puts the burden on consumers to opt out of countless intrusive data collection practices one by one that companies are currently barred from by default. Opponents say hidden economic discrimination persists because people without money to spend cannot pay for loyalty programs and and again, this is an opinion, and can expect worse connections, slower downloads, and more pop-up ads. Opponents say the proposition would allow employers to keep gathering data about things like employees' pregnancies, religion, or political activism. Cal Matters says that usually it's privacy big tech companies versus privacy advocates. But in this case, the private advocates are split. The privacy advocates that supported the 2018 law are split on this measure because it's complicated. I will say that the columnist in the LA Times, August 30, Michael Hiltzik, said if Prop 24 fails, privacy is at risk. So there's that. That's good enough. Thank you. You can see the money. Thank you.
Okay, I'll zip up to number 25, which is cash bail. As Rosalie said, these measures are more complicated, and in trying to allocate the time, I thought, well, this one looks like an easy one. You know, this one shouldn't take too much time, but the more you look at them. Proposition 24, the one that Rosalie just did, they say that there's it's a 52-page proposal. So, I give a prize to anybody that wants to take time to read all 52 pages. So the next one is about cash bail. The current, so let me get that stack of papers. The California legislature passed SB 10 in 2018, but bail bond companies circulated a referendum to block it from going into effect. So state law means that it can't be happening until after we, the voters, decide in the November election. The California Constitution guarantees the right to bail to ensure a person appear in court when a person is arrested for a crime or arraigned in court, except in certain circumstances. So these situations, you can't be on bail or be released. Death penalty, felony for violence on another person, threat of violence against another person, or a felony sexual assault on another person. So the bail bond, it's interesting that in 2018, the bail bond companies received about $560 million in fees. So they are opposing this. It requires each superior court to have an entity that provides the services to determine the risk. If a person is arrested for a misdemeanor, a lesser crime than a felony, then he or she must be released within 12 hours without a risk assessment, except if the person is arrested for domestic violence, stalking, a protected order, or didn't appear twice in the last year, then they wouldn't be automatically released. If a person is assessed as having a low risk to public safety, that person should be released with no bail required. The things that are considered in this pretrial assessment, if this law passes, would be the seriousness of the criminal charge, the person's criminal history, any history of failure to appear or indication the person would not appear, other information that would indicate a person's risk to public safety. There's a number of times when you wouldn't be released if you have specific sex offenses, violence, third DUI with a point, or a DUI with a 0.20 blood level alcohol. They haven't appeared 3 or more times in the past year. They're on trial for another offense, threatened to witness. There's a number of safeguards also that are included in this. At the preventive hearing, the court must find that there is a probable cause to believe that the defendant committed the crime before they can keep them. Assessment and release, if appropriate, would have to be completed within 36 hours. Certain conditions attached to that release. Fiscal effects, it's likely to cost in the mid-hundreds of millions of dollars to administer. However, the cost will depend upon how the measure is interpreted and implemented. And I was reading that 2/3 of the people that are in jails are there because of waiting a trial because they were unable to post bond. Supporter arguments. Let's see. The current bail system favors rich defendants who can easily make bail and denies release to poor defendants. And I hadn't realized or remember that bail can be either money or you can put real property up as that proof that you're going to pay. Even people who are eventually found not guilty or not even charged may be stuck with large debts to pay off the bail or the fees. Jail space will be reserved who are really dangerous instead of for the poor. The proposal is, so the supporter arguments, the current bail system favors rich, I'm sorry, I just read that. The opponent's arguments, while the intentions of the bill are good, its provision may result in more people being jailed than under the current situation. The proposal is biased against African Americans, Latinos, or other people of color because it uses a computer system to determine the results, and one of the factors is where the people live, so that is more likely to impact the people of color. Getting rid of bail will cost thousands of jobs in the bail bond industry. So there's a number of supporters, and let me go to that. Who supports it? So there's 44 organizations that support it and 51 who oppose it. So it's pretty similar. I'm just going to put it up real quickly and scroll through it. And organizations. But the interesting thing is looking at the money.
Marilyn, you have one more proposal.
Lauren, you've taken control of the screen and need to give it up.
Who did? Where did Marilyn go? we lost Marilyn.
It says Lauren Henriquez has taken control of the screen, and that she would have to give that up in order for Marilyn to come back.
Oh, I don't see myself as being the, oh, I guess they did make me host. Who do you want me to make host instead? Marilyn's not on the call anymore.
Would you give it to Barbara?
Okay.
She just called me and then hung up. So I'm not quite sure what's going on. She said it came unplugged. I think her computer.
Barbara, you're now the host.
I don't know how to be a host, but there was one more thing. And we got started quite late, so all the timing was a little bit mixed up. So
Property J.
Yeah, it was the county money for diversion versus the police, and that was supposed to be Rogers, but I'm not quite sure. I got a phone call and then she hung up. Carolyn, we need you on messages.
I've got it here. Do you want me to try and read it?
Please.
Yeah, go for it, Ann.
Yeah, go for it because, oh, wait a minute.
All right, this is Proposition J. I'll just skim a little bit. To allocate in compliance with all laws and regulations, the county's locally generated unrestricted revenues in the general fund as follows. That, okay, wait, that's not going to help us. A special election is hereby called. Okay, this is regarding the proposed county charter amendment, community investment and alternatives to incarceration minimum county budget allocation. Shall the measure annually allocating in the county's budget no less than 10% of the county's locally generated unrestricted revenues in the general fund be used to address the disproportionate impact of racial injustice through community investment and alternative to incarceration, and prohibiting using those funds for carceral systems and law enforcement agencies as detailed in the ordinance adopting the proposed charter. And it's a yes or no. And I'm just going to try and paraphrase. This measure is talking about allocating 10% of our general funds toward rehabilitation areas like mental health, help with drug addiction, housing, support for disenfranchised youth. The idea being that those monies would be used in not for incarceration, but for positive ways of impacting young people getting into the system. It talks about allocating 10% when the funds are available. If there is a California crisis emergency, such as we are in right now, that 10% would be toward toward emergency purposes. It's not fixed in cement because of the difficult times we are going through. And I don't know if that makes too much sense, but that just comes from off the top of my head. But that is what the proposition is, and I stated I stated the measure as read. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, can we hang
I
up?
think that's
Thank
the
everybody
end.
for their work, and thanks, Barbara, for taking over.
I did. Well, I didn't know. I think we're ending. So thank you, everybody who
Thank you.
kept your thing.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barb and Paul and Rosalie and Marilyn and Roger.
All of the rest of you.
And we
Thank
will.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, all of you.
Thank you very much.
Great. This was so good to be able to look at these issues.
Yes, and you can go to votersedges.org if you want more.
Right.
Don't forget. Okay. Bye.
Bye all.
Bye. Have a good
Thank
week.
you all.
Thank you.